computer. Okay. We are good. Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to, or good whenever you're watching this, and welcome to this chat. Very excited to speak to these wonderful people this afternoon, who are movers and shakers in their own right, and who have been working on a book called Movement Integration. I'm very pleased to introduce Martin Lundgren and Linus Johansson. We'll get to the other suspicious looking chap who's lurking around later on. Which is which, you might say. I'm the only person with hair, but let's start with Linus and say hi, Linus.
Hey all, Linus Johansson from Sweden. Nice to see you, or nice for you to look at me, rather. And
Martin.
Yes.
So that's what, so now we know who these people are. And then the other character is my sparring partner and very good friend and lovable little rogue and just somebody I adore hanging out with. And that's the skeleton in the background. So say hello, skeleton in the background. It's Gary Carter. Hi, Gary.
Hiya, how you doing?
I'm doing very, very well. It's all the better for seeing you. So these Martin and Linus came on a dissection of mine in Nottingham some years ago. I'm not exactly sure what year it was, but it was. Any ideas, guys?
2018, maybe.
Was it? Yeah.
2018, something like that. Anyway.
It must have been 16 or 17. It was
16.
I
don't know.
Sure. And as well as teaching them some very questionable English phrases, we sat down and Martin and Linus had this idea for a book called Movement Integration and wanted to know whether we would be interested in contributing to the chapter to it, Gary and myself. And of course we said yes, because they bought us beer and we sat in the beer garden, we talked through. And the result is this. This is it's been published through Lotus Publishing, which is the same publishing house as mine. So John Hutchings and Lotus has published this. I have to say, I haven't read it. No, I have. I have sort of flicked through it. And it's kind of cool. It's a nice book. But Linus, give me an idea where your thinking was in terms of what were you wanting to put into this cover? What was hopefully your whole model approach, and what were you trying to achieve?
Yeah, so the background is that me and Martin, we met a couple of years ago. We've had the same background in education, and Martin was one of the few in Sweden that worked that way that I was interested in knowing more of and get deeper into. So our path crossed, and soon we developed a good friendship and also a collaboration. And Martin is both a colleague, dear friend, and also a teacher and mentor. And he taught me, and together we developed a more systemic approach, and we will have to dive into that deeper further on, but a systemic approach to see and appreciate and work with the human form and function. And that's really what we try to capture and to put into sentences and images in this book. More systemic and less reductionistic view, where you view parts and bits, more seeing it as a system that is.
We'll come back to that idea of systemic in a minute. But Martin, what do you there's two words that are very powerful words in here. There's movement and there's integration. So how do you consider that you can integrate movement, and what are you integrating it into?
So that's a really good question. I think there are different ways to look at movement, but we look at movement in a interrelative way. And when you look at move it in an interrelative way, you look at how different elements in the body relates and how they move together, or how they. Do you understand me?
Yeah,
how they don't move together.
Well,
yeah.
That's really the trick.
Integration is more about how you can develop more efficiency and to get these parts or elements to work together in a better way, you could say.
Okay. So Gary, just talk us through a little bit about because give us your background in terms of because you're a big movement man, and you know that you use the word yoga probably in a way that is not necessarily fully followed. So what was your insight, and what do you think this book was going to be about?
What I thought it was about is exactly what it is about in terms of what the guys were talking about. I would see in terms of structure integration, because I've been trained in that method of manual therapy, is that I found that there was something missing in the whole structure integration process, which, as you know, is kind of born out of Rolfing. But there isn't really a kind of, I'll use the word movement integration in terms of under the structure integration umbrella. They talk about Rolf movement systems and stuff like that, but there was nothing applied within the schools that I went through that had movement involved in it. And when I was observing the practice sessions that were shown to us by our tutors at the time, when they would talk about adding movement to the system, it was something that really didn't relate to what I understood in a moving body. And I'd found that whenever I was working with various clients and students with my previous practices, I'm also a shiatsu practitioner as well. So I would have them on the floor, and then I would move them and do the practice with them, have them move again, do some work, and then get them up and move around, and then show me their patterns that they do in life. And then you'd see where it's a bit like clothing that's got a little bit snagged. You'd see that the system's not moving so well. You might need to make maybe a change in the tissues there, and then watch them move again, and you'd see them integrate it.
I think this is the issue, and this is the thing that, you know, when we talk about movement integration and function, there's an assumption that we understand what function is in a broad church. And I think my urge to people is to say, look, function is individual dependent. You know, one person's functional requirement of being 94 and being at home and able to get to the toilet on time and still be with their cat is very different to a 26-year-old who wants to, you know, run a 250-meter hurdle or what have you. So we assume we talk about function in the same way, but of course we don't. And so Gary's idea of getting people up and showing you what their function is, the ability to reach the cupboard and get the mugs out. So what's your take on the concept of from somebody that is very functional, i.e. you, Linus, and you talk about this in certain ways? What's your take on this model that we have?
Yeah, it's exactly the same, and that's why the word assumption is perhaps the greatest word to really acknowledge and drag into the light, because a lot of things out there in the world of movements and in amongst us therapists is based on assumptions. And what we really need to do is to crack those open and see what are they based on. What do you assume you mean when you say function? And what we try to do, and what I in this book, is really to create a framework within you can put these assumptions and put them to the test and see if is this really the function that you need, or the function that is suitable for you in that state you are in, or in that time span of your life that you are in at the moment. So what we need to create is a dynamic view and perspective that adapts to the person and allows us to develop that person's function in relation to where they are in life and the need that they have. Although sprung from the idea that we are all from the same seed, somehow the same DNA, we have this movement DNA within us that developed us to these bipedal movers on our feet with our free hands. We differ from cats and dogs that move in other ways. So we have this basic pattern that gives us this perspective that we can draw what we need from it and give that person exactly in that shape and form and need of function that they...
And the trouble is, within our industry, we reduce it to a system of parts. And Martin says, a very profound sentence in the book where he says, talks about the reductionist paradigm, and says the deepest metaphysical premise is that the world is a world of objects, and goes on to talk about illustration and movement later on in the book. I think that's a very profound statement, and I hate you for your ability to use the English language so beautifully as a non-English speaker. So hate you, admire you. It's amazing. Can you talk a bit on that, Martin, about this? Explain your sentence a little bit more. Firstly, explain what your understanding of a paradigm is, and the reductionist paradigm, and the idea of a world. And I find this, it's a lovely, profound statement. I'm going to steal it and use it and quote you with it. The assumption again is that the world is a world of objects.
Yeah. So I think a paradigm you could say is a metaphysical view of the world which under you operate. So it governs the way you see the world, how you interact with the world, and how it also governs the concepts you come up with, and So with the reductionistic paradigm, the assumption is that the world is a world of objects, and for some people it's how could it be otherwise, you know? And it's a real hard time. It can be really hard to see another paradigm. So
yeah, I think as humans we've tended to remove ourselves from the idea that we are part of the natural world, that we are a species and mammals within an operational sphere of other things, and so we've tended to place ourselves as above all that, not to understand that we are part of a natural process, and our huge brains have managed to somehow blot out the rest of the world and what's going on. Something I posted the other day was the fact that, you know, this year alone, there's something in the region 2.5 million children under the age of 5 have died around the world. So that's a frightening thing. But we remove ourselves from that, and so we look at the world as a series of objects that we're not really necessarily related to.
And so, if you contrast to the systemic paradigm, it's a world of processes instead.
Sure. I want to get onto this. I want to come back to this systemic thing in a minute, but I just wanted to ask Gary again in terms of understanding and helping people to understand that movement and these paradigms of objects, that we're not objects, but that we have to fit in. How does your ethos in terms of teaching movement relate to that, and try to get people away from that sort of objectifying idea?
It's a tricky one, Jules, because from the background I came from, I was a competitive cyclist. I was going to become a pro cyclist at one point, and we had a really amazing coach that always spoke to us in terms of feel. So in any of the training that we did, we were never really given any understanding of too much anatomy. You know, any work that would be called stretching was elasticity training, and it was about how our body moved in relation to the bike, into relation to the ground and the space around us. So it was, I'd never ever heard any other coach in my life in terms of movement speak like that. And I think it just set me up along a particular path that I always viewed it from a different perspective. And luckily, and you hear me talk about this man a lot, my father was always that way thinking. So he was looking at the wonders of the universe and trying to figure out how we fitted into that. So, you know, I was struggling at such a young age to try and understand what the hell he was talking about, but it had me view the body so differently. So when it came to training and bodybuilding, and when people were talking about, well, I'm training this area, luckily I had another guy that was saying, well, yeah, but if you're training the biceps, you've got to figure out how the calves are responding to that.
Yeah. Yeah, it brings us nicely on to our, well done, Gary. Brilliant segue there. Brings us on to our next aspect. I was writing something this morning and it struck me, I know it sounds obvious, but I know a lot of really good anatomists. And when I say an anatomist, I'll talk to you whether it's an anatomist in a lab or a clinical anatomist. And the anatomists are people that will understand the name of a structure, what it is, where it is, be able to point to and explain you the function. But if you take them out and you show them and you say, what do you think about that person? They know a lot about the human anatomy, but very little about the human. Yeah. So that's a very interesting disconnect. And I wanted to come to Linus, and Linus talks about another, again, very profound statement. Every time you open this book, there's something that leaps up at you. One says, Linus says, there are no borders between structures. It is all one. It's very profound, man. It's like Buddhist, isn't it? You know, it's like one where make me one with everything. Said the Buddhist monk to the hot dog salesman. And there's an end to that joke as well, where he gives him $5 for a $3 hot dog, and he doesn't get any change back. And the Buddhist monk says to the hot dog seller, "Where's my change?" And the hot dog seller says, "Change can only come from within." So carrying on this sentence, Linus then says, there are no borders between structures. It is all one. Therefore, we must acknowledge that the structures we speak of can only truly be seen through function. It's a bold statement. All those structures that we name as parts must be viewed with very blurred lines, and we must acknowledge that these imaginary lines are only for explanatory and educational purposes. And therein lies the problem. Therein lies the problem. We learn anatomy as manual and movement therapists that is broken down, created with lines, explained to us in a very medical way that we can then go and learn to pass an exam. And nobody's really putting this back together again. And I think that paragraph sort of sums up a lot of what I've been trying to look at for the last sort of 15 years. So, yeah, I'd like you to sort of just expound more on that, and we can start to talk a bit about more the systems that you mentioned earlier on.
Yeah, so that, you know, somehow through what I've read and what I've understood and how I've moved, I've come to the realization that this must be it. Still, the books told me that I was existing of bits and pieces, and that's why I came on your dissection course and with Martin, and that's where we met Gary, to prove for myself that it's wrong. What's written in the book cannot be. And, you know, diving into the human form, you know, it takes 3 seconds before, you know, everything you thought you held to be true is just shattered. It's right there in front of your eyes. But you also come to the realization that the people who were the first explorers that tried to get into this and understand it, they needed to organize it somehow. They needed to be able to create structural bits, pieces, to be able to pass on the knowledge. So, of course, they created the truth in relation to what they thought they were going to find. And we can only say that thanks to that, we can now say that that fits very well in some paradigms and in some perspectives. But we who want to move and see, treat, and acknowledge the body in a different way, we can see that that is not fitting our perspective, and we need to develop something else to be able to describe and pass on what we see and feel, and acknowledge that in the complexity that lies within. So we can only thank those that, you know, went before us and created that perspective. And that is also what I would like to add, that, you know, when we came to this world, we didn't come with a handbook that said that this part fits to that, and, you know, if that's broken, then do it like this. Everything is up for, you know, you can see it, view it, describe it in any perspective you want to. And just because they were the first to describe it that way in bits and pieces, it necessarily doesn't hold it to be true. It can be true in some perspectives.
No, I mean, the idea is the principle is that you keep repeating something often enough, it becomes a truth, however misguided. And but it brings us to the issue of at some point. Sorry, I'm going to ask you, Martin, this next thing. It brings to the point that we have to somehow explain it. We have to somehow be able to do that, to explain it. And the complexity of the human form doesn't lend itself to just being able to say it's all one man. And you talk about this in your chapter about the way of illustrating movement in your color illustration model. you know, how is this the best way? Is this a starting point? How do we best start to explain this and break this down in ways that allow us to learn things in sections, but also allow us to have an integration perspective?
Yeah, and I think coming back to the question you just asked, I think the biggest difference is between looking at trying to understand movement from the current anatomy perspective. Instead of trying to understand anatomy and begin from movement.
Yeah,
I think that's a really big difference. And we're going to get another view of anatomy if we start with movement.
And there isn't a language of movement anatomy. You know, the people that are trying to describe movement are using it in anatomical terms, but there isn't an anatomy of movement in terms of a language yet. So we're kind of scrabbling around in the dark, trying to find a way to describe it. But I think the anatomy, and this is something I say a lot, the anatomy gets in the way when you're trying to teach people movement. It just stops them. Then they become mechanical.
So,
I used to teach at a dance university, and they get me in year 2. So year 1, they get their basic anatomy. And what happens is I would watch them start moving at the beginning of year 1, and they were fluid and all over the place. At the end of year 1, they'd learned basic anatomy, and they were moving like robots because they thought it was all hinges and levers.
Well, this is the problem we come up with again, going back to the thing of where Martin talks about language. We have these idea of things like the core and people, because anatomy is a medical model. It's a model that has been designed by medicine, and so we're teaching. And the same thing goes because my background and my work isn't within movement, but was in manual therapy, but we're teaching movement and manual therapists a medical model of anatomy that doesn't fit in with their experience of the world and their experience of handling other people. So Martin, you wanted to carry on something?
yes. So the color illustration model is a way to look at movement first. And if you want to look at anatomy, I think anatomy makes more sense if we look at movement first and understand movement before we look at anatomy. Then, for example, fiber directions and how the muscles are positioned, and I think they make more sense if you start with movements, and they mean something else also.
So and usually, I think proposal that we could take second-year undergraduate medical students and give them a brief movement session to explain anatomy, or after each section of their lower limb class that they come and they do a movement session to then integrate what they're learning.
Yeah, sure will be interesting.
So I think the current anatomy model is good if you wanna learn medicine or become a doctor, but you know it's not good for if you wanna get a comprehensive view of how movement works. It doesn't really work, you know, because you have left out gravity, for example, you know, and it's a very limited view of how the body works.
Sure.
So the classic anatomy it has saved the life of both my father and my grandfather. Before the jaws of death gets a hold of you, a doctor that knows clinical anatomy can go in through a vein. They can change. They can operate. They can do all that stuff. And that's just before saving you from death. We, as movers and as therapists, we're not working closely to death. We're working as close to being as perfect as you can in your body, being free of pain, moving well, moving freely, and using that terminology and those ideas that really are for medicine and applying them to the end of the other spectrum where you really want to be somewhere else in your body. Then sure, we need another way of seeing, viewing, talking, and expressing that. That's really my point, that you have to see that you are in a spectrum. When I get to the hospital close to death, I sure want a doctor that knows what the he's on about, that can cut me where he needs to cut me and mend or do whatever, using the classic anatomy, using that paradigm. But when my knee hurts and that's not killing me, I want someone that can see how my entire system gets into my knee and where I need to work to be free and more movable to lessen the strain and the pressure and the pain in my knee so I can run again. There's really two ends.
Yeah, nobody puts that together for our undergraduate doctors, and it's something that has been bothering me for years. And you know, and then you speak to a GP who's 15, 20 years down into their career, and they say, oh, I can't, you know, arse and elbow type thing. They can't remember their anatomy from undergraduate studies. And so it's a subject that's learned and tended to be forgotten about. And nobody really puts those relationships back together again. You know, the head weighs 12 or 14 pounds or 6 or 7 kilos. And so it's any basic understanding of physics is going to tell you that if you move your head in a direction, it's going to change the load through your knees. Well, that's obvious. A 5-year-old could understand that, but it's not embedded into our understanding of the human. So again, human anatomy and human function, that there's that disconnect as far as that's concerned. So, you know, and again, so this is the kind of thing that when people like Gary talk about yoga, this is what my understanding of what he's talking about is how is that balance of movement created in the body. Do you want to speak on that, Gary, a bit?
Yeah, and it's the same thing. It's a balance of forces. You know, Martin was saying that, you know, the gravity is always missed out. You see this in any anatomy, but they don't talk about gravity when they're considering the anatomy of a body, or when someone's talking about an aim in the system, they don't include gravity in the system. You know, so, you know, you think about Pilates, yoga, Tai Chi, anything, even you, Julian, with climbing, gravity is always an issue. It's not an issue, it's a constant. So how do we negotiate gravity all of the time, and can we do it well? And when you see someone moving well, there's a relationship of them and them in gravity, and everything just seems to work harmoniously. The moment something's just a little bit off kilter, you start to see a change in their rhythm. You know, as you know, I lived many years in Brighton, and you see people walking along Brighton seafront with their dogs. And if you saw the dog with a limp, you would notice it before you'd notice the human with a limp.
It's true.
Because the human is just like, well, that's just normal. They have a limp. We expect that of the humans. But you see an animal with a limp, you see the rhythm's gone completely. You know, why is it we just accept that humans would have the same, you know, have the limp, and it's just part of the process? Not necessarily. And coming back to something Linus was talking about from your previous question, other than us being out there being manual therapists, I think one of the roles here is for the people that are interested enough, is to give them back the information so that they know how to take care of themselves. You know, it gives them what you naturally have as an instinct: look after yourself. But every now and again, of course, they would need to go and see the doctor. They would need to see the Bowen practitioner or the other manual therapist. But eventually, all of that stuff that we talk about, we learn to feel it. What point did we disjoint ourselves from ourselves? And then the anatomy books are confirming it all over again.
Sure. Yeah, there is a huge disconnect, and you can understand why it's got there. I want to come to Linus in a second and ask him about these clever words that he's using. But Martin, I want to say to you, if you could change one thing about the study of the human form tomorrow, you can only choose one thing. What would it be? What would you either add or take away or change about how we start about teaching anatomy or the study of the human form?
I would add the understanding of how movements of bone relates in the body, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So instead of looking at muscles and try to understand movements from a concentric perspective, you start to look at how the bones move in relation to each other.
Yeah. I think it's coming up with a mission statement, isn't it? By saying, right, before you start studying anatomy, understand that everything functions in relation to everything else, and you have to try and understand those relationships. And even though we're going to break it down into its component parts, you have to remember that there are no component parts, and they all have to come back together. Which brings me neatly on to my next question, to Linus, which is, I'd like you to explain a word for me, please, which it features in this book. Do you know what the word I'm going to be talking about in chapter 11 is?
I think I do. Is it ensomaticity?
Ensomaticity, ensomatosy. Where do you want to put the emphasis? Which syllable do you want to put the emphasis on? And so it's Ensomatosy. So Talk us through this word and the definition of it, and what your take on it is.
Yeah. So what happens is that the phrase or the word anatomy, which means in Greek to cut up, has taken therapy, and it gives us a clear description of and states how the body is constructed and how everything is put together with bits and pieces. And what we're trying constantly, and what we see people constantly trying to do, is still use the word anatomy and just add something else to it. Functional anatomy, holistic anatomy, always not letting go of that word and also that perspective entirely. So what we wanted to do is just shift altogether, not saying that that is wrong and not true, because it is. That's a perspective and that's the truth within itself if you want to accept that. But also say that there could be another perspective, another view, and we needed another word for it that was completely different, or, you know, in some way pronounced the same. So actually, in Brighton at the Mad Hatter Cafe, Googling away, Google Translate from English to Greek, typing in integration, and there, boom, right in my face, enzymaticity, meaning both integration, embodiment, and cooperation. All those three words in one beautiful Greek word. With that beautiful word, if you take away the en and toss in the end, you get soma. That means body. Within the word enzymaticity lies the Greek word soma, which means body. The embodiment, the incorporation, the cooperation, the integration. And just taking that word, giving the new perspective, and really just tossing it out in the world and letting people somehow fill it up themselves with the understanding and with the experience of, if I do it the other way, instead of seeing bits and pieces and trying to understand movement, what if I begin with movement? It's just me, the floor beneath me, and gravity. And if I start to move within these frames, what can I feel? What can I sense? What can I understand? And what I need is, why would I need this? I need this hook that tells me, okay, I need to understand this because I want to do what? We always need to have this what? Why? Because I want to work with people. I want to treat people. I want to feel them, make them feel lighter, stronger, freer, less pain. Sure, then we'll go from this perspective and aim for that. Or I want to do this and just move myself free, or just, you know, whatever. We always need the why to be able to go somewhere. We need to understand where we are, and we need to understand where we want to go. And from there, we can use either the classic anatomy perspective, or we can use a new enzymaticity perspective, and we can try to create a new path with perhaps, well, a new language it's difficult, but we're trying word by word to you know, broaden the language, because the language is really what sets us back a lot.
Yeah, you quote me here, and it's something I say a lot, that it's dangerous to make assumptions about function and movement based on dissecting people who are no longer functional and moving. And it's one of my favorite things to say to people is that we're always telling a story. We're always creating an idea. And so it's taking lots of different resources and trying to put them together to come up with a bigger picture, and trying to find as many different ways of explaining that as possible, you know, whether it be color or what have you. And so this I think when you say the word soma, I don't just think about body, but I think about the whole way of how we can understand the body of the human, rather than it's, you know, it's intellectual, it's emotional, it's all these things. There's something I talk about, which is emotional stiffness. If I'm angry, then I will lay down that connective tissue. If I'm open and loose, I will, you know, and movement isn't necessarily about sitting on the floor like you're doing there. It can be movement from an eyelid or a head or a shoulder. It's related to the function of the individual. So just a couple of things. One of the things that I read this morning, which made me laugh, was that one of the reasons we're not in a room, and I'd love to do, I think it'd be great to do a weekend workshop based on this book with the contributors, and it would be great to do that. But I read an article this morning that says that within this current virus, people who are suffering from obesity have a higher rate of death and serious conditions. And the study sort of says, well, we're not sure why. And it's like, duh. Do you think that the tendency for obesity will be for people that don't tend to move? And the whole idea of movement, why do we move as humans? To drive our fluids around. And why do we drive our fluids around? Because every system of the body is designed to move fluid, clean fluid, replace fluid, get rid of fluid, and distribute fluid. And it's about the cleaning system. That movement is the ultimate cleaning system for humans. We're this big bag of dirty fluid that we need moving around. And how you move it around, nobody cares, but move it around.
Big dirty bag of fluids.
We are.
This
bag of stinky fluid. If you don't move your stinky fluids around, it gets sick, and non-moving fluid becomes septic. You don't drink out of a green bubble, man.
I've been teaching online is that a lot of these people are in their houses. Some of them don't have gardens.
Sure.
So, getting them moving, and then what we've done is we've kind of found ways to kind of creatively move their furniture about, so they create a bit more of an obstacle course for them to move. So a lot of people are spending a lot of time sitting now, more than normal. So all of the sort of patterns that we might have seen that were being attended to in the 80s and early 90s with low back issues and constant sitting is beginning to return a bit more. And also people aren't wearing shoes, so their feet are beginning to collapse a bit on them. They're not really, they talk about, being barefoot all the time, but if you haven't done the work to maybe support the foot well, all of that barefoot stuff just goes to waste.
Do you know what? Somebody asked me recently, what exercise could I best do? I said, have you got a kitchen? They said, yes. I said, have you got a cupboard up there? And they said, yes. I said, what's in it? They said, the cups are up there. I said, have you got a cupboard down here? And they said, yes. I said, what's in the cupboard down here? And they said, my tin foods. I said, take all the cups out of the cupboard and put them on the counter. Take all the tins and put them where the cups were. And then take all the cups and put them down there. And they're like, and then what? I'm like, that'll do you.
Yeah. Or put your coffee over there, the sugar over there, the milk up there. Every time
you're changing your brain and you're bending down and doing all that stuff, do that. And then tomorrow do a different one. Martin, what's missing from this book? What did you have to leave out?
Good question.
Well, I left a lot of things out, it would be been a bit too complicated, I think, to include everything,
Yeah, but
that's what I'm asking you. What did you leave out? Which bit is the bit that you had to fight with yourself to decide?
It's a bit hard, but to keep it simple, For Gate Made Simple, it was really hard to keep it simple. I think
this is simple. Look, this book is not an entry-level book. I'm not going to say to somebody first stepping out onto their career of movement or manual therapy, pick this book up. There's a lot of heavy stuff in this book, and it's not a simple book.
But I think what's lacking actually is a practical perspective.
Yeah.
Because, when you start to read, you get it from an intellectual level, but you need to get it into your hands and your body and then learn the theory or have a relationship, with the embodiment and learning how to do manual interventions or using the body or whatever you do, and then learn. That's so you don't.
There's a lot of passion and a lot of ideas and a lot of feeling and a lot of opinion in this book. It comes from people who are very experienced and who've, it makes an assumption about prior knowledge to the reader. I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily, but I would say to anybody that, if you don't know a lot of the existing language, then, it's going to be something that you're going to go, right, I'm going to have to come back to it. It's not an easy read.
Or it's not. But Martin, if I could ask you, the hardest thing with this book, right, was actually writing it all together, because we all know this, but I must say that you, Martin, more than anyone else I know, are in a constant transition, always moving forward, always developing, and writing a book. And you expressed this when you had to write who you were and what you did, and you said, I don't know. I don't know what I do. I don't know who I am. I don't know what I do, because each day changes, because you find something new, you experience something new, and you feel that you grow all the time, very slowly. But writing a book is also a slow job. And what happens is that this becomes a constant. This is written now. This is milestone. This is a spear in the ground. So it's, in that sense, it's very good. But it's also extremely challenging when you got that sense that, yeah, this is cool stuff, but there is more, but I haven't discovered it yet. I haven't put words to it yet. I haven't found it yet. Wouldn't you say that that's how, I know you experienced that way?
Yeah, I did. So yeah.
By that leaving, a lot of stuff out that things that are going to come. That's why we need to write a second one.
I think what we've all done is it's like the equation of, it's very hard for a multi-millionaire to understand the need to shop at the discount supermarket to save 40 pence on a tin of beans. We come from a combination of probably 100 odd years of experience between us all, 100 and 200 with including the other contributors in the book, and we're coming at it at that level of going, well, man, we've come down this route, we've done through the traditional anatomy, we've seen these clients, and we have a view on it from a historical point of view, and trying to explain something like this, it's simply at an entry level is tricky. So we use language and stuff that we all understand. But Gary, what you were going to add on to that?
I think that's where we all kind of sit in the same place, and our meeting of minds has come about because I think we're constantly progressive with our own self-inquiry, and we're constantly questioning everything that we're doing, which keeps evolving it. The ideas we might have had a long time ago, it's constantly changing. And as Linus said, the book is a point that's there, but the story so far would be a good title of that, because that's only at that moment in time. And then 5 years down the line, there's different experiences again, different knowledge, and you might even look back at this and think, well, I don't believe in that anymore, because it's changes so much. But once the book's written, it's there. And a lot of people will hold the book and say, well, that's it. You said that, and that's how you hang on to things. It's like, well, no, you let it go after a while, because each body you work with, and Jules, this as well, everyone's so different. You can't put that there's this one movement pattern that's one size fits all.
Sure.
I've seen this in the yoga world, the Pilates world, and so on. Is that the person takes their body and they try and cram that round peg into the square hole and smash it in there, and then wonder why they've got injuries by doing that when they didn't listen to themselves.
Martin, did you want to comment on any of that?
No, it's a constant investigation or experimentation as well, and clarification, making better explanations and trying to understand things better.
Sure. I mean, I've written 2 books on Bowen, and I've contributed chapters to lots of things and written lots of things. And I've never met anybody who's written a book that doesn't want to get to the end of it and go, it was crap, and want to start again. And the whole process of producing something like this means that you sort of have done that, learnt from it, and the learning means that you want to start again. I think where any book like this fails, and I don't want to go on failure, is the fact that it doesn't ask us anything. It doesn't say to us, and I think this is where we need to, as a movement, go, right, what do we need to do as a human race in order to have a paradigm shift onto behaving differently or understanding differently? And I don't think any book can necessarily do that. But I think that's maybe where we need to, within our industry, our movement and our manual therapy industry, start to go, well, we're missing out. This hasn't been considered within our current crisis.
I think
focus.
Well, I think when people understand the importance, of synesthetic development and how it affects your emotions, your overall development, and your relationships, and how you are in the world and everything, I think if people would understand that, they would take it more seriously and would be more of importance to.
I think
to
it
develop
starts even earlier. We don't have a systematic approach to teach our young people the importance of movement and touch and what happens if you don't. You know, we're not engendering. We're giving them physical education, which people hate generally because it's organised bullying, or has been in my experience as a child, institutionalised bullying. But we don't really import the importance of, if you don't keep moving, you are not going to be able to move in the future, and impress that upon people.
And it's also you use your body as an object, you know, like how fast can I run, stuff like this, instead of you're leaving out the subjective part of being a human, you know.
Sure.
Like the kinesthetic development should be, it should make it easy for you to handle emotions, handling stress, and being in the world in a nicer way, you know, more comfortable way.
Yeah, sure.
Instead of just trying to achieve certain body looks, or running this fast or whatever.
Thank you, guys. I'm going to call time on us now because we're going to run out of time. But I would like to say that a lot of the people who contributed to this book, Gary Carter, Asa Harmon, Cecilia Gustafsson, Lucas Henriksson, Lena Bjornsdotter, and Gary Ward and Jerry Hesch, they're not. Well, Gary Carter was in it, but a lot of these people aren't obviously in the chat today. So thank you, guys. I'm looking forward to maybe at some stage getting together over a weekend, and we can run a workshop and talk through our ideas with people. I think that would be an amazing thing. It was a pleasure to contribute to this project. Thank you for your hard work and your initiative, and getting Gary to write it in time as well. So well done on that.
Thank you, Julian, because you were really one of the first stepping stones into this, the meeting with you and the connection you made for us with Lotus. So you are a big deal to this book, that it actually happened and that it became this. So we're very grateful for your contribution and for you helping us into this.
Absolute pleasure. I pride myself, you know, in the olden days, that's what I say in my chat with my dissection guys, is that what I do is I specialize in not being particularly good at anything, but bringing people around me who are, and then allowing that magic to happen. And things like, you know, my dissections down in Scotland where I have them. We have Ebai running a movement session. We have, you know, Oliver running a manual therapy session in order to bring movement into these dissections. And then Anna Baretsa-Duran, who's an incredible Pilates and movement teacher, again, is going to be running these sessions as well with us. So, you know, it's part of that whole thing that, you know, just dissecting dead people doesn't help us, but it's part of the whole weight of evidence that we're going to have, and the whole. It's a great read. I do suggest that that anybody that's involved in any kind of therapy, interested in body-wide anatomy, integrating movement and stuff like that, pick it up and have a little look at it, and stay in touch, and we'll be a workshop, doing a workshop soon. So thank you once again, chaps. Stay safe, and look forward to being in your physical company at some stage in the not too distant future, where we can talk rubbish and drink beer again.
Yeah, sounds great.
Say hi to Nate, say goodbye to people.
Bye-bye.
People.